Imagine a war where the front lines are not just muddy trenches or dusty borders.
Right, something entirely different.
Exactly. Instead, I want you to think of a conflict where the primary targets include Amazon data centers, billion-dollar radar installations, and the very physical architecture of the global internet.
It is a massive shift in how we understand warfare.
Welcome to another deep dive on Military Chessboard. Today, we are looking at a geopolitical situation that reads quite literally like a near-future thriller. But it is unfolding right now.
And it is moving incredibly fast.
It really is. Our mission today is to unpack a very large stack of military intelligence reports, Defense Department maps, and geopolitical analyses regarding the rapidly escalating conflict between the U.S., Israel, and Iran.
Specifically, we are going to be examining the first 100 hours of this campaign.
Yes, the first 100 hours. And I want to ask you, the listener, right up front. How does a single missile aimed at Turkey potentially set the most dangerous, unprecedented strategic trap in modern military history?
It is brilliant to be here to tear into this with you. To properly set the stage for you listening at home, we need to look straight past the immediate shock and awe of the explosions.
We have to analyze the actual logic of power at play.
Spot on. We are examining what military strategists call a multi-domain campaign. For those following along, that means this is not just ground troops and fighter jets.
No, it is a highly coordinated, simultaneous operation.
Exactly. It is happening in the air, at sea, in cyberspace, and involving space-based satellite tracking all at once. In modern warfare, those initial hours absolutely dictate the momentum, the rules of engagement, and the ultimate strategic goals of every single party involved.
Now, before we get straight into it, I need to make something very clear to you, our listeners. The reports we are working through today draw some highly charged, controversial parallels regarding domestic politics and the rhetoric of global leaders.
Yes, they certainly do.
And we are not here to validate these comparisons or take any political stance whatsoever. As your guides today, our job is strictly to decode the strategic and linguistic analysis the authors are making. We are doing this impartially, just to help you understand the broader picture.
We are just reading the board. Knowledge is most valuable when it is understood in its full, unfiltered context.
Well said. Right. Let us unpack the sheer scale of this multi-domain escalation. Going through the Defense Department, tracking maps, detailing those first 100 hours, the numbers are, frankly, staggering.
They really are.
The U.S. and Israel coalition conducted over 1,000 individual kinetic strikes in just 5 days. That is roughly 200 strikes a day.
Relentlessly targeting Iran's Revolutionary Guard, critical military bases, and importantly, the financial networks supporting the regime.
And we saw U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth come out with a rather uncompromising statement. He explicitly said that the U.S. is accelerating, not decelerating.
Which is a very clear signal. They are perfectly willing to take all the time necessary. They are moving massive amounts of naval and air assets into the region to sustain a long-term operation.
And what stands out when you map those assets, and I find this fascinating, is how incredibly fast the geography of this conflict expanded.
Oh, it did not stay confined to the Persian Gulf or the immediate borders at all.
Not at all. We saw intense, full-on naval warfare stretching thousands of kilometers away, as far as the Indian Ocean and the coast of Sri Lanka.
The coalition claims to have hit or sunk over 20 Iranian vessels. That included neutralizing a destroyer right off the Sri Lankan coast.
While at the same time, Tehran claims to have successfully struck a U.S. warship in the Indian Ocean. The entire maritime corridor connecting east to west is essentially an active combat zone right now.
Which naturally brings us to a massive contradiction in the intelligence reports that I think we really need to pull apart.
Oh, you mean Karg Island?
Yeah. Exactly. Karg Island. Just to give you the baseline, Karg Island is the absolute crown jewel of Iran's energy export infrastructure. 90% of their crude oil leaves from that specific hub.
90%. That is practically their entire economic lifeline.
It is. Now, the Strait of Hormuz, the major shipping lane right next to it, is completely paralyzed. The maritime tracking data shows a 90% drop in commercial tanker traffic.
Yet, despite over 1,000 coalition strikes raining down everywhere else, Karg Island itself has not been touched.
It is fully intact.
Leaving the enemy's primary economic lifeline running during a hot war completely defies traditional military doctrine. Why would they do that?
It does seem counterintuitive at first glance. Yeah. But when you look at the geopolitical data, it comes down to global economics and an immense degree of strategic forward planning.
Right.
First, you have to factor in Beijing. China has a massive structural reliance on cheap Iranian crude oil. If the coalition were to obliterate Karg Island, it would not just hurt Iran.
It would send immediate, devastating shockwaves through the global economy.
And severely penalize China in the process. The reports highlight a highly telling anecdote about this. A purportedly Chinese cargo ship, named the Iron Maiden, was tracked safely navigating straight through the paralyzed Strait of Hormuz.
Without a single incident.
Right after intelligence suggested Tehran would allow Chinese vessels safe passage, despite the broader blockade.
It is surreal to picture. You have a completely paralyzed active war zone, and the Iron Maiden just sails right through the middle of it because of back-channel economic agreements.
It illustrates perfectly how interconnected modern conflict is. But there's a second, perhaps even more fascinating strategic theory detailed in the analysis.
I know the one you were talking about.
If the primary goal of the U.S. military was simply to instantly sever the current government's funding, Karg Island would have been cratered on day one.
Absolutely.
The fact that it was not suggests a staggering level of hubris, or at least extreme confidence. The theory is that the coalition is deliberately protecting the energy infrastructure for a potential successor regime.
So, if you are actively planning to topple a government and install or support a new one, that new government is going to need a functioning, robust economy to survive the transition.
You simply do not burn down the house if you plan on moving a new tenant in next week.
That is a wild, incredibly bold calculation to make while you are still fighting the current tenant.
It really is.
But as intense as the air and sea campaigns are, the digital front line is where this conflict completely rewrites the rulebook. Here is where it gets really interesting for anyone paying attention to technology.
Iran has been launching these unprecedented counterattacks, and they're not just firing back at troops.
I was looking at the target list. They physically destroyed a $1 billion early warning radar system located in Qatar, specifically the NFPS-123 Block 5.
And it is crucial to understand what that is. This is not just a spinning dish on the back of a truck.
No, it is a massive, multi-story, solid-state phased array radar. It is capable of tracking ballistic missiles thousands of kilometers away. Losing it is a massive strategic blinding of the coalition.
And that is just one of 7 U.S. radar stations they have targeted across 5 different Middle Eastern nations.
Taking out the radar is a textbook asymmetric military move. But what we should really be focusing on is how the physical architecture of the internet has become a legitimate battlefield.
Yes. Tehran did not just target military tech. They intentionally launched kinetic strikes against Amazon data centers located in the UAE and Bahrain.
They physically blew up the server farm.
They did?
And that completely flips our traditional understanding of cyber warfare. We usually picture hackers sitting in a dark room trying to overload a website or inject malicious code.
But Tehran realized it is much more efficient to just send a drone to blow up the physical building where the cloud actually lives. And this raises a profound question about the future as global infrastructure. The rationale from Tehran is that these specific Amazon Web Services data centers provide critical cloud computing and logistical support to U.S. military and intelligence operations.
But think about the terrifying precedent this sets. If you wipe out a major regional data center, you are not just blinding military intelligence.
But those servers are shared.
Exactly. You are instantly crashing regional banking networks. You are halting global supply chains and maritime shipping software. You are completely paralyzing the internet for millions of everyday civilians.
It demonstrates that civilian tech infrastructure, if it has even a tangential military application, is now considered a primary target.
So if you are listening to this right now and thinking a conflict on the other side of the world does not affect your day-to-day life, imagine your bank suddenly going offline.
Or your business's supply chain completely freezing.
Simply because the server farm hosting that data in a third-party country just got hit by a missile. The collateral damage is no longer just geographic, it is entirely digital.
It completely changes the calculus. We're looking at the weaponization of the modern world's nervous system.
This idea of changing the calculus naturally brings us to the most alarming recent development in these reports.
The Turkey pivot.
Yes. For the first 5 days of this campaign, Iran was sticking to targets strictly in the Gulf states. But then the tracking data showed an Iranian ballistic missile flying directly over Iraq and Syria.
Headed straight for Turkey.
Headed straight for Turkey, before it was finally intercepted and shot down by NATO air defenses over the eastern Mediterranean.
And the diplomatic fallout from that was instantaneous. Turkey immediately immediately summoned the Iranian ambassador, issuing incredibly stark warnings that they reserve the right to respond militarily to any hostile acts.
NATO also quickly mobilized, releasing a joint statement condemning the targeting of a member state and promising to stand by its allies. It was a massive escalation.
Right. And looking at the map, Turkey shares a massive 500-kilometer border with Iran.
If Tehran wanted to hit U.S. assets there, like the Incirlik Air Base, which actually houses nuclear weapons, they could have done it on day one. Why actively avoid Turkey for 5 days, only to suddenly poke the NATO bear?
The geopolitical analysts in our stack break this down into 3 core strategic reasons.
Let us go through them.
Reason 1 is simple pragmatism. The Gulf states were much easier targets for the initial phase. Tehran calculated that the Gulf states have significantly weaker militaries and domestic economies that are highly vulnerable to cheap drone swarms.
They lack the extensive, grueling combat experience required to mount a serious, sustained counteroffensive.
Exactly, making them low-risk targets while Iran tests the coalition's defenses.
It makes sense. You go for the softer targets while you gauge how the broader war is going to play out.
But reason 2 is about Turkey's strength. Turkey is an absolute fortress. They are ranked as a top 10 global military power.
They have a massive, battle-tested army and a highly advanced domestic defense industry. They are not just importing weapons, they are building their own state-of-the-art drones, armored vehicles, and precision artillery.
Provoking Turkey is not like provoking a Gulf state. It means inviting devastating, highly sophisticated counterstrikes right on your own doorstep.
Which makes attacking them seem incredibly risky.
It does. Which brings us to reason 3. This is the absolute nightmare scenario, and it revolves around the NATO alliance and the Republic of Azerbaijan.
Right.
Attacking Turkey directly risks triggering NATO's Article 5, which treats an armed attack on one member as an attack on the entire alliance. It could pull the entirety of Western military power directly into the conflict.
Furthermore, Turkey has an ironclad alliance with Azerbaijan.
Yes, and this brings us to a critical demographic vulnerability that is often overlooked. Ethnic Azeris make up nearly a third of Iran's total population.
Mostly concentrated in the northwest of the country.
Exactly.
That is a staggering demographic reality. So if Azerbaijan is pulled into the conflict alongside Turkey, they could actively incite separatist movements and internal rebellion among that massive Azeri population within Iran's borders.
They could effectively fracture the country from the inside out.
So knowing all these catastrophic risks, why would Tehran fire a ballistic missile at Turkey on day 5?
The analysts conclude it was a deliberate, highly calculated strategic signal. It was not a navigational error.
Tehran is actively demonstrating to the U.S. and Israel that if the coalition pushes this campaign further specifically, if they attempt to assassinate the highest levels of leadership or put ground troops into the country, Iran is fully willing to escalate this
into a total uncontrollable regional war, even if it means fighting NATO.
It is an extreme deterrence tactic. They are signaling, if you back us into a corner, we are perfectly willing to pull the entire house down with us.
And that signal perfectly transitions us into the nightmare scenario that the analysts are most concerned about.
Ground war.
Yes. We are seeing politicians and media commentators increasingly floating the idea of deploying ground troops or heavily arming Kurdish proxy forces to march in and overthrow the regime.
But the military strategists in these sources are throwing up massive red flags. They're calling this a catastrophic strategic trap.
It is essential to look at the geographical and demographic realities of the region, which are often severely underestimated.
I found the geographic analogy in the sources incredibly helpful for this. For you listening, try to visualize this. Take the map of Iran and lay it directly over a map of Europe.
It covers almost half of the entire European continent. The sheer scale is vast.
And it is not just flat, empty desert. It has a population of over 90 million people. That is double the population of Iraq.
Plus the terrain, especially in the northwest, is incredibly harsh, mountainous, and rugged.
The Zagros Mountains are an absolute fortress, perfectly suited for endless guerrilla warfare.
If we look at the historical context, the idea of breaking this nation's resolve through sheer attrition is a deeply flawed concept.
Yeah.
We only need to look back at the Iran-Iraq War, which raged from 1980 to 1988.
That was an 8-year brutal meat grinder of a conflict.
Characterized by World War I-style trench warfare and chemical weapons. It resulted in an estimated 1 million total casualties, including 50 to 100,000 Kurds.
Let that number sink in for a moment. 1 million casualties. When you compare that to the losses sustained in modern Western conflicts, the scale of suffering is almost incomprehensible.
And despite absorbing those devastating generational losses, the state survived. That history proves they possess an immense, deeply ingrained cultural tolerance for long, brutal, attritional warfare.
A ground invasion would not break their morale, it would likely galvanize it.
And even if an invading force somehow pushed past the rugged mountains and survived the grueling war of attrition in the provinces, you eventually have to face the urban warfare nightmare.
The sources detail the grim reality of trying to take the capital, Tehran. We're talking about a sprawling, dense metropolis of 16 million people.
That is roughly the size of the entire New York metropolitan area.
Urban combat is notoriously the most difficult, dangerous, and resource-intensive form of warfare known to modern militaries.
The sources share some incredibly sobering perspectives from U.S. veterans who fought in the Middle East. They recall that systematically clearing a single large multi-story building in cities like Baghdad or Fallujah took 5 to 8 hours.
Going room by room, checking for booby traps, navigating blind corners, and engaging combatants.
5 to 8 hours of grueling, terrifying work.
5 to 8 hours to secure one single building. Now multiply that by a sprawling hostile city of 16 million people.
It's mathematically and logistically insurmountable. A ground invasion would not be a quick surgical victory leading to a parade.
It would immediately become a multi-year quagmire,
drawing dark parallels to the U.S. experience in Iraq or Russia's agonizingly slow, costly progress in Ukraine. It is a strategic trap, perfectly designed to bleed an overconfident invading force dry.
This idea of a multi-year quagmire abroad naturally bleeds into what is happening back at home. You simply cannot sustain a grueling, bloody urban war without immense political unity and public support.
And looking at the reports regarding Washington, they are anything but united right now. The internal political friction is a crucial aspect of understanding how modern wars are either sustained or ultimately halted.
Now, I must pause here to remind you, our listeners. Our sources bring up some highly polarized political comparisons regarding the U.S. domestic response.
We are simply unpacking the analysis provided in the text.
Exactly. We are not taking a side. We are just reporting what the defense analysts are looking at. But the data on the legislative divide is clear. Recently, the U.S. Senate held a critical vote on a bill that would have required explicit congressional approval for the president to wage war against Iran.
The bill was rejected, but it was an incredibly tight vote. 47 against, 53 in favor of rejection.
That narrow margin highlights a deeply fractured government regarding how to handle this massive escalation.
But the part of the geopolitical analysis that is truly fascinating is the breakdown of the political rhetoric itself. The analysts drew direct, highly specific linguistic parallels between how the U.S. administration is currently justifying this conflict to the public and how Russia justified its invasion of Ukraine.
The exact phrasing they use is uncanny. The sources point out that President Trump justified the initial wave of strikes by stating, if we do not do it first, Iran would do it to Israel.
The analysts compare this directly to President Putin's justification for crossing the border into Ukraine. He claimed that Kiev was actively planning to attack the Donbas region first, thereby necessitating a preemptive strike.
It is a classic framing of aggression as reluctant self-defense, and the parallels go much further than just the preemptive argument.
Both Trump and Defense Secretary Hegseth have repeatedly used phrases like, "We have not even started, and we are not the initiator, but we will end it."
And the analysts match those exact quotes, almost word for word, with statements made by Putin over the last few years.
At the Valdai Discussion Club, Putin explicitly told the audience, "We are not the ones who started this. We are trying to end it."
Furthermore, he previously warned the West that Russia had not started anything serious yet. The rhetoric of immense, withheld power is a universal thread.
And look at how the conflict itself is labeled. The U.S. administration is carefully, legally avoiding the word war, instead officially calling it a large-scale military campaign.
Which, of course, the analysts parallel to Russia's absolute insistence on legally defining the Ukraine conflict as a special military operation. Why do superpowers who are on completely opposite sides of the global geopolitical chessboard employ the exact same linguistic framework?
Because it is highly effective at managing domestic public opinion. It reflects a universal logic of power. They frame their actions as reluctant, preemptive, legally restrained, and ultimately defensive.
It highlights that the psychology of war justification completely transcends borders, alliances, and political ideologies.
It really forces you to recognize how much of modern warfare is fought with words, legal definitions, and carefully crafted narratives.
Just as much as it is fought with ballistic missiles and kinetic strikes on data centers.
Precisely.
So, to bring all of these threads together and summarize the sheer complexity of what we have unpacked today, we are looking at a conflict that completely defies traditional military boundaries.
In just the first 100 hours of this multi-domain campaign, we have seen relentless precision strikes that intentionally leave a massive economic engine like Karg Island untouched, purely for geopolitical chess moves.
We have seen the blinding of the coalition through the destruction of billion-dollar early warning radars.
We have witnessed the literal, physical weaponization of the internet through kinetic attacks on global data hubs in third-party countries.
We have seen a highly calculated provocation of NATO through a ballistic missile aimed at Turkey, designed to signal a willingness to pull the whole house down.
And hanging over all of this is the looming, terrifying threat of a grueling urban ground war in a country half the size of Europe.
A strategic trap that could easily ensnare an invading force in a multi-year bloodbath.
It represents a profound, permanent shift in how state-on-state violence is conducted. And it leaves us with a critical, lingering question for you to ponder.
What is that?
If modern warfare now inherently involves targeting global data centers, crushing regional banking systems, and destroying internet hubs located in entirely third-party, non-combatant nations, how long until the very concept of a regional conflict becomes entirely obsolete?
That is a chilling thought. Are we entering an era where every single citizen on Earth, regardless of where they live or what their government does, is a potential target of digital collateral damage? It is certainly something to seriously mull over the next time you log online or swipe your bank card.
It changes everything.
It really does. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. If you found this breakdown valuable, please hit the like button, drop into the comments, and let us know your thoughts on the strategic trap of urban warfare.
We would love to hear what you reckon.
Absolutely. And make sure you subscribe to Military Chessboard so you never miss an analysis. Keep questioning the world around you, keep looking past the headlines, and we will catch you next time.